I have a very strong, visceral memory of encountering that first movie when I was a teenager. I was working as a usher at a suburban Toronto multiplex. And in the summer of 2001, that first Fast film came out.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. And in this week's episode, I speak to the deputy arts editor and film editor over at the Globe and Mail, Barry Hertz, about his new book all about the Fast and the Furious franchise. That is Welcome to the Family, the explosive story behind Fast and Furious, the blockbusters that supercharged the world. That is coming up in the second half of this episode. But before we get there, I am joined once again by my colleagues and co-hosts, Rebecca Pahle and Chad Kennerk of Box Office Pro, as we discuss box office news and everything in between. Guys, welcome back here at another frigid, cold streak week in New York City. Rebecca, when's the last time you stepped into these city streets without a patch of ice under your feet?
I tell you, I was looking forward to nice temperatures today. Tuesday was supposed to be nice. It's gray and miserable.
Spoiler alert, it was not nice.
It's been a while. Though I do have, I have a couple tickets for upcoming cinematic experiences. So I'm just going to cross my fingers that the weather plays well with me there. But if it doesn't, well, I'll be inside and I can handle a rainy walk to the subway.
And the weather might not be quite as frigid over in Denver, Colorado, where you're at, Chad. And I understand that you made it to the movies last weekend.
I did. I've seen a couple things. Wuthering Heights, I got to catch with my wife. That was a nice date night. I don't know if it's the best date night movie. It has some tougher stuff in there, so some dates might have ended on a bit of a downer. It's not a happy rom-com.
It's the best love story of all time. I'm like, oh, isn't it? Doesn't it end super not well?
It's
but people liked
it. Yeah, no, I liked it. I think Emerald Fennell is a divisive filmmaker. You either kind of like her stuff or you don't. And I tend to like her films. And yeah, I enjoyed this one. I also saw How to Make a Killing with Glenn Powell. I think Glenn Powell is keeping his track record going in terms of charm and charisma. I would like some stronger material for him. This one didn't work so much for me. I think because it's all backstory and you're constantly being reminded that it's backstory. I think there's probably an audience for this. He's definitely continuing his leading man era.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that performs this weekend on the Glenn Powell side. On the Emerald Fennell side, I can tell you, I know there's been some feathers ruffled with how, let's say, loyal to the source material her Wuthering Heights sticks. And I would just like to remind folks that this isn't a book report as a medium. We're not trying to recreate your experience reading a book on the screen. That sounds absolutely boring.
I'm sure there are tons and tons of very faithful BBC television adaptations of Wuthering Heights that still exist for you to see. I might get out to see this one. I saw a headline accusing it of being a superficial adaptation, which kind of piqued my interest because, like, it's February. I want to see fancy costumes and have a fun time at the movies. Like, I'm fine with superficial. It's gross out. I need something pretty in my eyeballs.
She's been very candid about this is not, that's why the quotations are around the title, right? Because this is her interpretation of it. And for me, what I saw was like being in her mind as she was reading the book.
So like kind of quasi half canon, half fanfic. I like that.
Yes. Yeah.
This is your mother's Wuthering Heights.
Yeah. Exactly.
Wuthering Heights. That's why we go to the movies. You can take several stabs at a book and have several different visions to execute it and have several different visions come out in theaters. You know, we didn't really hear that much back in 1954 when Luis Buñuel made Wuthering Heights in Mexico. That's the 1954 Abismos de Pasión, which is similarly not particularly loyal to the source material, but that's fine. This is Luis Buñuel doing Wuthering Heights, and it kind of works. And I have absolutely no problem seeing Emerald Fennell do her own version of that. And yeah, if you're going to go around criticizing a director, bringing their own distinct take to source material, bunch of male directors you can point to and say the exact same thing.
You know, the fact that she does have people riled up about it. I mean, I did not love Saltburn, but the fact that she has, I guess, a dedicated clan of haters actually makes me respect her filmography more. It has a point of view. It's doing something.
There's an intention behind what she does. Whether you like it or not, that's beside the point. She's doing her thing. And she's building, I think, a distinct identity visually to her projects. Like you, Rebecca, I really did not like Saltburn, but I loved Promising Young Woman. That was a movie that you put on my radar when you interviewed her back when it first came out. Fantastic movie.
In fact, several years before it first came out, because it was supposed to come out in 2020. And then,
right.
It died 2 years before it finally made it to theaters. So for me, Wuthering Heights is probably going to be the rubber match on her filmography so far. But I have a feeling she's probably going to be one of those filmmakers that there's things she makes that I really like. There's things she makes that I really don't like. You know who I have the exact same experience with? Jim Jarmusch. Jim Jarmusch's movies I either love or really don't care for. And that's okay. I'll still keep on going because at least I know I'm going to see a bold take on whatever topic they tackle. And, the box office, I think, reflected that over on opening weekend. We had a $38 million 4-day debut for Wuthering Heights. That is on the lower end of our ranges that we put out last week. Before release, there were some folks saying, hey, this could hit as high as 50 by the end of the holiday weekend. We were very careful not to put that hype on this movie because, as we know, movies opening for the female demo aren't really opening weekend films. They'll start slow and they'll gain legs as the weeks follow. We saw that with The Housemaid back in December that didn't have a record-breaking opening weekend and had a fantastic multiple, really just shooting up above the $100 million mark in subsequent weeks. I think female audiences are very loyal to the movie-going experience as a demographic, but they're not necessarily the fan-driven opening weekend crowds that we see in, say, Gen Z or horror or even anime audiences. They take their time to go, and word of mouth plays a big, important role. And I am curious to see how that word of mouth shapes up in the weeks that follow.
I will say I had some Gen Z girls behind me that clearly had no idea what this story was or what it was about. And at the end, I was hearing them absolutely sobbing, weeping behind me.
You were saying a lot of people were dressing up, right?
Yes, yeah. I actually had a lot of people dressed up in, Wuthering Heights garb.
I mean, if you invest in it, you might as well use it. Or maybe they had to buy their own costume.
There are only so many Renaissance festivals that happen every year. Believe me, I know. I have this stuff.
So that was the 9th number 1 debut for Warner Brothers in a row. That studio has been on a hot streak in connecting with audiences really since a Minecraft movie last year. Really good news to leave the weekend. In number 2, we had Sony's animated film Goat opening to a $35 million 4-day weekend. We finally saw Zootopia 2 just let go of its dominance of the family film market, and a new movie came in. Sony found the right date with the right film. Didn't have to be a huge tentpole, but it did great business. It opened twice as high as their 28 years later sequel that came out in January.
A new crop of talking animals, and then we have Disney's Hoppers coming out before too long as well.
Yeah, and we'll see how that turns out. In number 3, this is the movie that I saw last weekend, guys. I had the opportunity to go down to Fayetteville, Georgia, in the outskirts of Atlanta, where they have all the new backlots, the new movie studios that they're shooting movies at. Across the street from those studios, our friends over at Georgia Theater Company, GTC, have a brand new movie theater. It's GTC Trilith. Incredible, incredible movie theater. I think a fantastic reflection of where the industry is going today. They have the biggest Onyx screen in the United States, that direct view LED technology. This is the second generation of those LED screens. Looks wonderful. Looks fantastic. They screened Wuthering Heights for us, but I had to take some phone calls. But I did go in another auditorium later on that week and catch Crime 101, the Amazon MGM movie that opened up in third spot with a $16.3 million opening weekend for the 4-day. I loved Crime 101. I mean, it's not going to be the best picture of the year by any means, but as I was telling Chad before we started recording, guys, this is a crime thriller straight from 1998. This is the type of movie that would maybe like make $70 million at the box office, and that you would end up like when it ended up in Blockbuster, like they would make a big deal out of it, and you'd show up to Blockbuster on Friday after school, and all the copies would be missing. And then a couple months after that, when it hits HBO, HBO would give its own ad campaign for the big debut of
Like,
Crime
yeah,
101
multiple
on HBO.
Avengers in this movie. Da, da, da. Yeah. I mean, it seems like
That type of
it's
thing.
February. It's a February movie.
Yeah, it reminded me of those adult skewing movies that I watched way too young back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I had a great time with it, and I really hope it finds the audience it deserves. It's the sort of movie that A Long Window would have helped back in the 90s or the 2000s. It's the sort of movie that would have really benefited from DVD sales and DVD rentals. I don't know if that type of movie can succeed in the streaming ecosystem, but theatrically, this was a big overperformance from what could have been a genre counter programmer from Amazon MGM in the lead up to Project Hail Mary. But it was actually a really, really good script with great performances, fantastic directing, a really good night out at the movies. I suggest it for anyone. And for anyone in Georgia, in the Atlanta area, make the drive out to Trilith. That GTC theater is something to behold. Really, really great example of what movie theaters look like today.
And that bodes well for what we're looking at in terms of Amazon MGM Slate coming up.
Oh, absolutely. I think we needed a nice positive sign of life. And there was a lot of talk around Melania when it came out a couple weeks ago. But at the end of the day, Amazon MGM took a documentary with a politically divisive figure in a politically fraught time and over-delivered in its release strategy. Like, we have to tip our hat to Amazon MGM with how they handled that. Mercy isn't the movie that I think anyone really had too much riding on, but Crime 101 is another overperformer. So we've already had 3 Amazon MGM wide releases so far this year. 2 of them have overperformed, and the one coming up next in March with Project Hail Mary might end up being a home run. Our tracking on Boxoffice Pro currently has that title opening between $60 and $70 million. A lot of folks are excited. I think that Super Bowl trailer got a lot of people tuned into what might be coming. I don't know how you feel about it, Rebecca.
My blood pressure went up a little bit because as soon as we got the email saying that tickets were on sale and I saw IMAX 70 millimeter and I was like, what? I rushed through it, got some tickets for me and Eric. Yeah, I'm excited to see this one. It looks very Martian-y. I loved The Martian. I like Lord and Miller. So yeah, already seeing that one, the full big AMC Lincoln Center location shebang.
I'm excited for that too. Over in news on the distribution side, we had a big benchmark at the global box office with Disney joining the $1 billion club. And it's still February. This is off the strength of a couple titles that came out late last year.
Yeah, like kind of what you were speaking as to earlier with Wuthering Heights and the female audiences, it's really not being an opening weekend only sort of situation. Obviously, we see the same with family titles. The holdover weeks are so crucial for those, even for films that did not do the Zootopia 2 crazy record-breaking opening weekend. It was largely on the strength of Zootopia 2 and some of those over December holdovers, namely Avatar, Fire and Ash, but then also some of the newer films that have been out from Disney so far this year, particularly Send Help.
Fantastic benchmark here for Disney. And in other studio news, we are just getting reports from other outlets that Warner Brothers is reportedly reconsidering the increased bid from Paramount Skydance to acquire the studio. It looks like the revised and improved offers from Paramount are really taking some real impact here for the Warner Brothers board that are now reconsidering which dates they take to the industry doom prom, as I am calling it, because I just don't see an upside here on anyone buying this studio. And if you want to find out more about our take and analysis on the potential sale of Warner Brothers, you could go back to the December 11th episode of this podcast where we break everything down in a nice hour of podcasting. But now let's move over to the future because we've got a new release date for a Fast and Furious movie coming out on March 17, 2028 is Fast Forever from Universal Pictures. And now is a great time to catch up on the entire franchise. And how better to do so than with Barry Hertz's new book on Fast and the Furious titled Welcome to the Family, the explosive story behind Fast and Furious, the blockbusters that supercharged the world, available in bookstores everywhere now. Coming up after the break, my interview with Barry Hertz.
Imagine a world where your cinema's digital experience is as unforgettable as the movies you show. At Boxoffice, we strive to make that world a reality. We offer innovative solutions like custom-built websites, mobile apps, and user-friendly ticketing pages, crafted to meet the unique needs of cinemas. It's all about enhancing customer loyalty and making booking a breeze. Take your cinema's online experience to the next level with Boost. Contact us today at sales@boxoffice.com to learn more.
And we are back here on the Box Office podcast with our guest this week, Barry Hertz, who is the deputy arts editor and the film editor over at the Globe and Mail in Canada. Barry is also the author of Welcome to the Family, the explosive story behind Fast and Furious, the blockbusters that supercharged the world. Barry, welcome to your first appearance here on the podcast. We've known you through CinemaCon sightings there in press row up in the rafters at the Coliseum. It's good to have a conversation outside of Vegas for once.
It is, yeah. I mean, the air is much clearer and cleaner where I am right now than usually in Vegas.
Well, you just wrote over 350 pages on Fast and the Furious movies, and I'm sure your first draft had even more. So I definitely want to get into that. I was telling you just before we started recording, I had not seen any of these movies. I had seen the first one. I'm lying. Okay. I saw the first one when it first came out, and I was a teenager, and it was just a massive hit in Mexico. All my cousins loved it. And then I just fell off from the franchise, and it became this thing that like drove Universal alongside dinosaurs. Probably still continues at a global level to do that. And when I came back to it, I saw all of the sequels, I think in a span of like 10 days for a podcast episode we did here. So I am excited and ready to ask you all the questions I couldn't figure out in my research. But I want to start, Barry, by asking, when did you fall in love with this franchise?
Well, I think it's kind of probably a similar story to yours. Like, I have a very strong, visceral memory of encountering that first movie when I was a teenager. I was working as a usher at a suburban Toronto multiplex. And in the summer of 2001, that first Fast film came out. And the great benefit of working at a movie theater, of course, was the free tickets and the opportunity to watch movies during a shift if you could kind of sneak away. So I remember the opening weekend for that. You know, I saw it like just as a customer with my free movie pass, but then I would watch bits and pieces of it over the weekend as, you know, during my shifts. And there was something that really just struck me about it. Like, there's obviously, like, I'm a big action movie guy, so, you know, there was that element to it. But I think like the chemistry between Vin Diesel and Paul Walker, right from that get-go, there was something special about that. And then you could just see like the energy of it carry out from the crowd out into the parking lot. There was, you know, everybody was like revving their engine, trying to do donuts, like just doing as much as they could with their very crappy cars as they could in suburban Toronto.
That's one of the reasons I think the movie connected so well in Mexico, because it's not supercars that you could, well, now it's probably supercars that you could never afford and like tanks and spaceships. But that first one, it was Honda Civics, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it was cars you saw on the street. It was cars that you could afford and you could tune yourself. It wasn't like watching the Goldfinger car chase of like a car with, you know, missiles and ejector seat. It's something very plausible and attainable. And I think that really was crucial for that first movie to work.
Completely. And I think, you know, talking with the people who were involved from the very beginning, and especially involved in that car culture and kind of acted as consultants for that first movie, like they would say that exact same thing. It was like they were, you know, piecing together this subculture, street racing, you know, one purloin part at a time. Like they were pooling their money together to soup up the Acuras or the Civics that they, their parents could afford and turn it into something new. Like it wasn't, they weren't the sons of Porsche or Lamborghini owners, or even like the hot rodders that we kind of think about when we think about American car culture in, the 50s and 60s. This was a very scrappy kind of DIY environment. And I think that spoke to a lot of people, like the relatability, the low barrier to entry into this culture.
And it's really fascinating going into the history of how this became a movie to begin with. It reminds me a little bit of the genesis of something like Pitch Perfect, another Universal franchise, which originally it's long-form journalism. It's this type of stuff you do. It's the type of stuff I do. We go in, we research a story of something we find fascinating, and all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, someone options the story. You don't really think about it. Maybe you get a little bit of cash. Very rarely do these things turn into movies. Very rarely does long-form journalism turn into a global franchise. So how does a long-form story about street racing in New York City, actually in my old neighborhood here, I think it's like Upper Manhattan, I think it was. How do you go from that to like Southern California in the first movie with like holding up trucks to steal DVD players to outer space and Sao Paulo and Dubai? Where do we go from point A to point Z in this story?
That's what I found so fascinating about the franchise, both as first as like an audience member, like watching this series grow and become increasingly surreal and ludicrous, all with like a knowing sense of tongue-in-cheekness about it. But I think it has a lot to do with like, so you start with that relatively authentic, sincere portrait of car culture in the first movie, which, as you say, like originally it was New York inspired. Then they optioned the article and they moved the action to LA. Screenwriter David Ayer, who, went on to have a very strong career, roots it very much in that LA, hard scrabble LA environment, working class that he grew up with, that he knows. And then you see there's a big desire to be ambitious, to shift geography. Let's go to Miami for the next one. Let's go to Japan for the third one. Let's go to Mexico. Let's go to Brazil. And it was, I think, that constant doubling down with each successive installment that really kind of made it special. Like there was always that sense that, okay, we're going to make a sequel. Obviously, it has to be, more of the same, just more of that, more of the same. But let's also let's go bigger. Let's go better. Let's always try to outdo ourselves. And there perhaps arguably a ceiling to that. Outer space would probably be one shark jump too many, or one tier too many for a lot of audience members. But it worked for the most part. But I think it was that drive, credit to Universal of giving them the resources to do that constantly, because they saw that they could consistently expand the audience and expand the marketplace, certainly outside of North America.
And it's interesting, as you put this together, one of the things about this franchise that I found fascinating is that it mirrors the direction that Hollywood was going to, I think, with every sequel. The first one very much feels like a teen movie, like a B movie, just like a notch above straight to DVD.
Right. Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
And which I think is its charm. I really like that about the original. Then some of the early sequels, especially Tokyo Drift, really feels like a teen movie. The first part of it.
Sure.
I think it's set in a high school, actually. The guy gets sent to boarding school in Japan, after he messes up a car. The second one feels like a rejected Miami Vice script. It's the Miller Lite version of Miami Vice.
Yeah.
But the DNA of the franchise always had a diverse cast. And little by little, it starts going to new locales. Yeah, sure. You go into Miami, you go into the coast, I think in Too Fast, Too Furious. You go into Tokyo for Tokyo Drift. Then the fourth one really takes this really global dimension to things at a time when the global box office in the late 2000s, early 2010s begins exploding.
Right.
The DVD market's going down. So that DVD-ish vibe that the first movies had kind of subsides, and they turn into these movies for global audiences, and the global market responds in a way that it still does. I think it's the only thing keeping the franchise going in the face of diminishing revenues here in the US and Canada is the overseas marketplace isn't done with this franchise, And that's what got it to the heights it got to. Can you talk to that aspect of the growth, not only internationally, but how the casting of the film specifically created this platform to get to these heights?
Yeah, I mean it's very interesting, especially, we talk about like 4 is when it kind of all kind of coalesced, and it's weird because 4 is kind of like the sequel to the first one that audiences never really got, because that was the one that had all the cast members together. And in the meantime, we had this Miami diversion, we had this Japan diversion, and then finally we were kind of given the part 2 really that we deserved it. And it was cast very interestingly because it was to not only appeal to that North American market, but to the rest of the globe. And I think it starts off with the first because people kind of forget this was initially a vehicle built around Paul Walker, who was coming off the Skulls. Vin came into it afterward. But when he came into it, he had this ethnic ambiguity about him. And which is something that he has kind of maintained as his persona outside of the films, that anybody can kind of read themselves onto him. So if you were a Black audience, if you were a Latin American audience, Dominican, you could kind of see yourself in Dom, because we just didn't know really what he was. And he was like every man to every people. So once you get there, then with 4, you bring in an Israeli actress with Gal Gadot. You bring in, Mexican actors. You bring in part 5 is, I think, when you would even expand further, because now we're in Rio and we have Tyrese back. We have Ludacris back. We have Sung Kang back. We have everybody. And it was very, I think, deliberate upon Universal's strategy, because they saw, first of all, Rio was kind of picked as a market to set this in, because they saw that Brazil's audience, the middle class there, was growing and people were going to the movie theaters more often.
Well, this is the like great heights of like Brazilian consumer economy in the early 2010s, right? This is the BRICS era when Brazil could do no wrong financially.
Yeah, exactly. And, Universal was very canny about this too, because they did press junkets that were specific for the Brazilian market. When they went to Cuba in Fast 8, they did, very specific Cuban junkets and Latin American junkets, going down to Miami and taking, Michelle Rodriguez and Vin down there. But at the same time, they weren't ghettoizing the franchise at all. They didn't, it was never marketed as like, this is a niche kind of, African-American movie, or this is a niche like Hispanic movie. It's like, this is a movie for everybody, but you could also see yourself in it. And I think that's what helped appeal to not only markets that the films were set in, but for instance, like China. Like these movies were huge in China, and were kind of like the ones that sustained themselves when the Chinese market kind of ebbed and flowed. And the last one didn't do as well, but it still did better than expected. But it's because I think the Chinese audience could see that it is like a global thing. It is not like a tool of American soft power necessarily. It's something that speaks to a global sense of adventure and freedom. And you're right, like North America has kind of tired of this franchise, but yet the global markets still love it just enough that they can keep going.
And it was the right pivot, I think, to the Universal executives that were able to recognize that and make that change. 2001 is when the first one comes out. And you mentioned, this is a Paul Walker vehicle coming off the Skulls. It really plays like a teen movie. We spoke about this at the beginning of the episode. It really feels like The Faculty, right? It feels like Teaching Mrs. Tingle. It feels like these post Dawson's Creek Hollywood era projects. And I think even some of the sequels were they supposed to go straight to video, straight to DVD? Was that the conversation with either 2 or 3?
There was conversation with 3 around that, because 2, it did well. Like it outperformed the original by a bit, but it also cost about twice as much. So the returns weren't quite commensurate. And so there were initial early conversations that didn't go too far down the pipe. But that were like, okay, do we make this a DTV kind of sequel, like they were doing with their Bring It On franchise with American Pie? Like there's like 6 or 7 American
that's a
Pies.
perfect comparison.
Yeah, nobody will ever
No one
hear
would have
of.
blinked.
Yeah.
No one would have blinked on that.
Exactly.
Like if that happened, you would have been like, oh, you go to Walgreens, it's in the $5 DVD bin in 2008. You pick up the original and then you say, oh, there's 2 sequels.
Yeah, you're like, okay, like the font is the same, so I guess I'll give this a try for $5.
It must be the same movie.
Yeah. But then they, when Justin Lin came on for 3, he managed, I guess, to convince them like that. No, this could be like a real theatrical property, and there was a sense at that time, because Vin was not back and Paul Walker was not coming back, that they would have to kind of, if they wanted this to succeed, they have to anthologize it a little bit. So there could be like Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift just as much as there could be Fast and Furious Mexico City, something like that. Like that was kind of the
exactly.
Plan.
Yeah, and you're right that Justin Lin comes in and really becomes the first pivot formally for this franchise, where it could have gone one direction, embraced its B-movie roots. It kind of sets everything up for Fast and Furious in 2009 to come up and completely retool, renovate the franchise. It's fascinating that all that work is done by a director that made a very good teen movie in 2002 and Better Luck Tomorrow, right? That was a kind of like this standout movie that you watch that today. And I watched it recently as we prepared for the Fast and Furious episode on our podcast. And you just see so much DNA of like, oh man, a lot of what the franchise stands for, you can kind of see in the background of Better Luck Tomorrow. So I really think that it's very rare for a franchise to have a part 3 bring in a director that gives it an entirely new identity moving forward.
Completely. And credit to Justin Lin for being able to navigate that. And, of course, like I love Better Luck Tomorrow, just as much because it is a teen movie, but it is a teen movie with a spin, right? Like it's featuring these kinds of characters from a culture that we don't really get to see portrayed in that light. And, we can go, deep into the weeds of the whole Sung Kang Han thing and how Better Luck Tomorrow is technically the pre like Fast and Furious 0.5 or something like that. But credit where credit.
I love Reddit, man.
Oh yeah,
I mean, the fans of this franchise will go to many lengths to get the storyline make sense.
Completely. But we could also so Justin comes in, he did Better Luck Tomorrow, like a micro budget credit card movie, as he likes to say. Then he went to do Annapolis for Disney, which was the boxing drama at the Naval Academy. And then he's handed like this, kind of dented, like weird franchise. It's like, well, I'm not sure what, they're not sure what they want to do with it. And he adrenalizes it. He makes it global. Like he takes it out of the US and gives it this whole new spin and opens up this whole new audience. And then he's able to build on that through parts 4, 5, 6, and then, comes back for 9 and a little bit of 10. But it's really fascinating just the way that he himself has been able to level it up alongside the studio's ambitions.
It's interesting that you got so much great access for this book, but I do have to ask, and I think this is what makes the book interesting. Universal decided not to participate, and Vin Diesel decided to sit this one out, even though you got, an impressive amount of folks to come in and give you their time to talk about this franchise. What was the process behind getting both the studio and Vin Diesel in? Can you comment on that?
As soon as I sold the book, basically, and I sold it to the publisher saying, like, I have no guarantee of access with any of these people. I've talked with a bunch of people in the past, as part of my day job as a newspaper critic. But, I'm doing this like on my own. But so I started reaching out to people. And of course, like the first people I reach out to are Universal. And I set up a meeting. I go down to LA, which was already kind of in motion because I'd already set up some interviews with people who were already eager to talk. And I say, like, listen, like, I want to write this book. I think it's a wonderful franchise. I don't think it's been talked about in an in-depth fashion with as much kind of seriousness as I think it deserves, even though it is obviously like a wacky franchise. And they were kind of just sussing me out, I think. And they basically said, like, we've never participated or opened the books or anything like that with any author who's trying to write a book about one of our properties, and we're certainly not going to start doing it now. So, go with God, good luck, but we're not helping you and we're not making connections. And so that was, kind of expected, but still disappointing regardless. Not that I was expecting them to say oh yeah, well, let's drive you over to Vin Diesel's house right now and you can hang out with him for the rest of the weekend.
Well, at that point, honestly, Barry, if that would have happened, it's a DVD extra feature.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I didn't want to write an EPK.
To retain your editorial independence is so important in a project like this.
That's exactly it. I did not want to do a coffee table book with sunny anecdotes from everybody about how great it was and everything was wonderful. I wanted to get the real story, and not having the people talk to me who were there at the moment was, challenging, but that's a great challenge to have. And so the Vin Diesel element was kind of related to that. I reached out to him many times through many channels. I really exploited every contact, every person I had ever talked to in the movie business for my job. In the previous 2 decades, I was going back to it and was like, can you help me in some regard? So I was really, I was being shameless about it because that's what you have to do, to reach out to people. But I did hear back, not directly from him, but one of his co-stars, one of his longtime co-stars basically said through another channel that, I'd love to talk about it. Sounds like you have a really great insight into the series, blah, blah, blah. But I'm not going to talk unless Vin talks. And that was kind of the line in the sand for, the A-list talent of these franchises. And I get that point entirely. Loyalty is, something that is very thematically tied to the Fast movies and to the actual Hollywood stars system. And I understand why Vin didn't want to talk, because this is his baby. This is his empire. And he doesn't need the outside scrutiny that a book might offer. He doesn't, there's certainly advantages to talking with someone like me, and there's disadvantages to doing it. And I guess he just played I'm just going to kind of stay the course and ignore it, I guess. And, that's his right to do. Would it have been great to get his firsthand perspective on everything? Sure. Would he have been as honest and open as a lot of my other sources? Who's to say? So, yeah, it was a challenge for sure, but it was one that I had anticipated would be the reality. Yeah.
And that also opens up the fact that you can go into anything that happened in these productions to the detail that you think it warrants. And I wanted to ask you about that. What was the most interesting discovery you made about these movies, about the making of these movies, whether that's a scrapped creative or casting decision, or maybe some of the on-set tensions that everybody ended up hearing about outside of Hollywood that arise later on?
Yeah, I mean, those tensions obviously are a huge part of the franchise's lore in pop culture. There are so many untold stories in Hollywood history that we just have no idea. But it is interesting, when something like this nature, when, we're talking about Vin Diesel's tensions with Dwayne Johnson, when it spills out into such public view, I found that just as fascinating as something that would be totally kept off guard, because it was just so bad. And everybody was so riled up by it, and tensions were so high that it did kind of break containment of don't whatever stays on set, whatever happens on set stays on set. So that was interesting, and to learn about a little bit more about the context of those tensions and the history of them. But I would say one of the interesting things is in terms of scrap plot lines or development kind of swerves, these are movies that change so many times. And it kind of gave me a window into the development process in general. I guess, it's probably not that odd for a huge tentpole like a Marvel or a Star Wars or a Fast and Furious to start with one idea. And then, there's a million hands in the kitchen and everybody wants to chop it up and everything gets changed. And some of these scripts are just so fluid. The fact that they often start production with no finished act. You're just making it up as it goes along practically. I mean, perhaps in some of the movies you could kind of glean that on your own as an audience member, but finding out firsthand that it really is kind of fly by the seat of your pants, it was pretty shocking. And I will say, like, in terms of like, there is so much ambition within the Fast franchise. And one of the things that they kept on kind of returning to in development, but haven't yet kind of done, is like this legion of super doom, like bringing all the villains from the previous films back together to take on Dom and his crew. Because, you know, one of the things that the films have done very successfully is like Part 5 took all the disparate characters from all those different movies and super teamed them up.
It has to be a scheduling nightmare.
Oh yeah,
to
well
shoot
that's
these things,
the exact.
you retain so many cast members that are doing so many other things. I can only imagine.
Oh yeah, I mean, and with every new movie, they have bigger demands, they have bigger contracts, they have bigger entourages that need to be accommodated. It is crazy, but they have, like, for instance, in Fast X, there was an early draft that I got a peek at where it's like Dante, the Jason Momoa character, assembles like all these villains that we thought had been defeated in previous films, like Cole Hauser from Part 2 and some, I don't like any villain that was previously there. That it's like, oh, okay, we like just like this comic booky kind of thing. I found fascinating, and I you know, will they ever be able to do that because of scheduling, because of budgetary concerns, which really did crop up heavily on the 10th film, the most recent one? I don't know. We'll see.
Well, let's talk about the 10th film. You were probably there at that CinemaCon a couple of years back when Vin Diesel maybe expanded that Universal presentation by 30 to 45 minutes.
Oh man, like it had to be like the backstage people must have been freaking out.
Oh, I mean, I left. I had to go to the bathroom. I mean, it's just I couldn't stay through the monologue. But a big part of what I sat through is, hey, there's going to be a big 2-part aspect to Fast X, and then something called Fast X 2, which to everybody else, it's 11. But in Hollywood math, it's Fast X 2. God bless them. We never really got that film, the second part of the Fast X title on the schedule. Universal is a studio that is lifting its weight with no superheroes, meaning they don't have that many established franchises outside of dinosaurs and witch musicals, and the witch musicals thing is done. What's going on here? Do you think there's going to be this Fast X 2 project come to light, or what do you think is holding it up?
Well, I think there's a number of things holding it up. And I was disappointed at this past spring's 2025 CinemaCon because I expected, or I was hoping for something, anything. Like, nobody uttered the word fast nor furious, right? Like, it was all about,
right. It was a surprise.
It was a surprise. Like, you know, I'm not saying like show us a sizzle reel or anything like that, but you know, you've got the exhibitors captive there, and you could at least say like, okay, 2027, 2028, we're coming back. And they just like completely ignored the subject of their biggest ongoing franchise. So that was concerning. But from my understanding, there's kind of two elements that have held it up. One is the budgetary concerns. Fast X, by some reports, cost upwards of like $450 million production budget. We're not even counting marketing here. So because we're just bringing in so many people and we're shooting now in so many different places, and the contracts and the contractual obligations are so high, and the box office return was not commensurate with that at all. In North America, it did not do very well. I think it crested at like 150, and worldwide, I think it maybe got up to like 700 or so, which is not where these kinds of films need to be. This, you know,
these are $1 billion films.
Yeah, parts 7 and 8 are $1 billion plus films. That's what they need to be. Part 9, it's like a who knows, like it's a what if situation because it was released right kind of after the heights of the pandemic. Like, it was one of those films that was like the first film out there when theaters were open. So the cost is a problem. And there was, you know, I think Donna Langley was out there saying like, we need to bring this back down to earth. And listening to people, that meant like shaving it down by at least $100 or $200 million production budget, which is a very tricky thing to do with these films because expectations are so high. So there's that. And then, you know, Vin did have some legal trouble that was kind of a little underreported, or certainly quietly reported, in which he had a civil lawsuit he was facing for sexual battery and labor violation codes of unfair dismissal. That was ongoing in the background. That was originally set to go to a jury trial in this past August of 2025. Then it was pushed to February of 2026. And then in the interim between that, in late November of 2025, it was basically tossed out by a judge in California on what could be said a legal technicality. The alleged incident occurred in Georgia. This was being tried in a California court. Anyways, so it was tossed out. There have been, I think the lawyer for the plaintiff said they will appeal or they will go to other avenues, but we haven't heard anything yet. So from my understanding, as long as that kind of legal issue was there wasn't going to be any green light officially. There wasn't going to be any movement. Now that that is over, I wouldn't be surprised if by, say, this year's CinemaCon, we get at least an update on it. We're looking at 2028 as the earliest, but that is a long time, not only to leave people on the cliffhanger of Fast X, which ended on like a literal and metaphorical cliffhanger in 2023, but usually these Fast films were very highly scheduled. Like Universal was pumping them out every 2 years. And it was a big, to do that was asking the filmmakers a lot. That's part of like why Justin Lin burned out a little bit. To go that long, it'll be interesting to see if the audience appetite is still there, if the market is still there for these films. But I do think, short answer, I do think that they will close it off in some fashion.
Yeah, you can't leave that out there. If it's a budget thing, $700 million overseas, you'll figure out the budget.
You'll figure it out, yeah.
There's gas left in the tank here, and I think there's a lot of folks excited to see what comes next. Barry, thank you so much for joining us here on the Box Office Podcast. And a big thank you to Barry Hertz from the Globe and Mail for joining us to talk about his book, Welcome to the Family, the explosive story behind Fast and Furious, the blockbusters that supercharged the world. That is available in bookstores everywhere. We will be back with a new episode of the Box Office Podcast next week, so please subscribe, rate, share this podcast with people that might be interested across the industry and outside the industry as well. And we will talk to you again real soon.